a lot of publications that I can use for this opportunity. And also, always I remind you, I will base all these lectures on Polish theatre on this one book, A History of Polish Theatre, which was recently published in Cambridge. So today we go, the public theatre is sometimes called public theatre, sometimes called national theatre. Because today, for example, we call this public theatre in Warsaw, which is kind of continuing this early tradition, national theatre. But for us important is this public aspect, because this is the theatre which was, at the beginning at least, offered to the society for free. That's why we can call it public. But of course, this is also a time where the nationalistic movement was very strong, because Polish identity was kind of very complex issue. When we would study medieval Polish culture, we couldn't say one culture. There were many different cultures. We have many different religious minorities living together and producing something that sometimes had a little to do with Polish essential nationalistic identity. So this kind of mixture of different cultures is something that defines medieval times. Later also, this would be a very important part of this Commonwealth, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Not only Lithuania and Poland is in this huge, large, strange political construct, but also some other people, a lot of Jews and minorities like Ukrainians and so on. And so this is a very complex situation. And the 18th century actually is the starting point of something like national reflection on who we, the Poles, actually are. And this is also a very bad story from modern perspective, because this nationalistic movement, they become extremely non-tolerant. And we would have some evidence of this strange attacking of religious minorities different from Christian and especially from Catholic religion. So, but first, and unfortunately, this is the story that I would at least partially read from the text, because this is not my expertise to the end, this special enlightenment in Poland, and so I'm not sure. I will not improvise. I will start to bring you the facts which seem to me definitely established today. And so, first, international context. We approach in the era of so-called enlightenment, scientific revolution. Francis Bacon, John Locke, René Descartes, Immanuel Kant, Isaac Newton. These are these geniuses which contribute to this new era, sometimes called the era of reason. French Revolution, individual liberty and religious tolerance is promoted. Reductionism is invented as a scientific method. This is a very interesting thing. This reductionism, this is the method which is to analyze any scientific problem in its parts. So, in order to understand even complex issue, you part it. You divide this for small parts, and you reduct the complex issue to simple series of more simple issues, and you study these issues, and you think that after this you can have knowledge of this synthetical issue also. Today, of course, if you know chaos theory, for example, this reductionism is passé. We don't use this in many even scientific methodologies. The reductionism is rejected. But even in the middle of the 20th century, reductionism was still, and in many situations, it's still very useful. So this is a really groundbreaking scientific method. Questioning of religion. This is very important. In Poland, you will see this is not so really easy. for me, the most crucial message which I always identified with enlightenment was the sentence by, of course, Kant, who wrote in his essay, what is enlightenment? Sapere aude, dare to know. And this is something which kind of defines this enlightenment as the new time of reason. This is also the time where Poland was not only Poland, but was strange commonwealth, mixture of different cultures, and as you can see, extremely large territory. More context. Peter the Great, the Russian Tsar and Emperor of Russia, modernizes the country through industrialization, the first navy, educational institution, and the new Russian capital, St. Petersburg. Thousands of people died in building St. Petersburg. He, the Russian Tsar, chose for the new city the most dangerous place, I think, in Russia, full of wet earth, totally unadjusted to any buildings, and so people were really dying. Two Central European powers emerged, very important, because this power would contribute to Polish partition in the future, Austria and Prussia. Ottoman Empire gradually fades away on the Black Sea. Poland was at the time the second largest country in Europe, with a population equal to Spain and the Kingdom of Great Britain. Of course, French and Germany was much better. Polish democracy of nobles was dominated by aristocratic oligarchy. Economically backward, it was a state of serfdom and farming. This backwardness was kind of defining and blocking this modernization. All these attempts to modernize Polish society actually failed. The democracy of nobles, this was actually beautiful in theory. It looks like kind of very democratic situation that these nobles, of course, these people who could afford, these people would kind of govern by voting. But this whole democracy was also based on very crazy so-called liberal veto. Everybody, and it was enough, the one person, everybody could stand during the voting and say, I do not agree. I have the right and the freedom to say no to this decision, to this legal concept. One person was enough to stop the proceedings. And so you can imagine the corruption. If you are a rich oligarch, if you are a rich aristocrat, and you want to pass your own dealing, your own businesses, so you will promote some decisions, you would block some other decisions, and for this, it's enough that one poor noble was paid by you, and this guy would stand up and say, liberal veto, my free not agree. And so this is something that totally destroyed this so-called democracy, because one person would block. And of course, this usually was used against any modernization attempts. French connection, it's very crucial to understand these times. Comédie larmoyante, I don't know if you know this. This is called in English a tearful comedy. It was something that was introduced in France, and very, very early it was transported to Poland. Polish people at this time were totally fascinated by French culture, especially king and the court. The French artists would be performing at the theater, and so tearful drama and bourgeois drama exported by French people to Poland became leading theatrical aesthetics. 20 regular French language theater companies operated at the time beyond France, promoting the République des Lettres, a transnational community of scholars and writers. Giovanni Francesco Albani organized the first independent French theatrical company in Warsaw in 1762. after a year, it went bankrupt. They performed Marivaux, Diderot, all these new French poets of theater, and Marivaux, especially Diderot, they would not only write plays, they would also write treatises on the new theater. And this is the time when this idea of neoclassical theater is born. They are, of course, constructing their own image very much idealized of the ancient culture. And they introduce these famous unities of action, of time, of place, which I am arguing in these ancient Greek theater classes was not really true. It has nothing to do with ancient theater. This is their vision of ideal theatrical piece. And so, next, the National Theatre's full performance, Bielawski's Intruders in 1765, imitated, for example, Molière. Nivella de la Chaussée, Mélanide, such a play, this comedy, this is kind of exemplary comédie larmoyante, this tearful comedy. As you can see, the premiere, the first production in Paris was only a few later reproduced in Warsaw. First in French, next in Polish. Another very popular at the time piece by Louis-Sébastien Mercier, Geneval, was in Paris, and a few years later in Polish. And another, his play L'Indigent, was in Paris, and a few years later, 4 years later, in Polish. So this was very, very fast transposed. This French neoclassic plays, especially the tearful dramas, they represented very, very fast in Poland. Pierre-Auguste Caron, Beaumarchais, probably the most famous at the time of these French writers. Two of his, even today, very popular plays, La Barbière de Séville et La Fausse Journée or the Mariage de Figaro, very, very early were presented in Poland. Of course, there was later the fascination with Racine. Racine was also translated into Polish and presented. So this French connection was extremely important. And if you remember, when I was introducing this Polish theater class, I was recalling the situation from this parliamentary meeting when Polish nobles attacked the actors, the French actors, who would perform the captivation of the German emperor. And next part of the French connection in details, the first French troupe at King Poniatowski, this is the last Polish king, in his Royal Theatre, was a company created by Louis-François de Villers, a French actor from Vienna court. It's very interesting that many French influences came to Poland, especially with actors from Austria. Austria was this transmitting place for French culture to Poland, just like this guy here. Yet the quality of their acting disappointed the king, and the contract was terminated after a few months. After Francis I, Holy Roman Emperor and Duke of Lorraine's death in 1765, this is the year of the establishment of the public theater in Poland, more French actors came from Vienna. So even if Polish National Theatre would be established in Warsaw, still there is this streaming of French artists and amazing popularity of French performances. In 1776, National Theatre joined Hammond's troupe after touring Austria and Northern Germany. Again, Hammond's was the typical French company, and they came from Austria actually. The French were performing twice a week at Poniatowski Theatre. And even we have journal, French language Journal Littéraire de Varsovie, regularly published reviews of the French premieres. So there was not only popular entertainment, but also promotion of this entertainment. There was special, and of course, many educated people, they spoke French. At the time when the school system was also reformed, the foreign languages, first of course Latin, but next French and German were introduced, and many educated people could actually speak all these European languages. And I could say this first mass theater movement is paradoxically connected to this religious school system, especially because of the Jesuits. But these three orders, Jesuits, Piarists, and Theatines, there were three different Catholic orders who actually based their education on introducing theater performances. Not often, but at least sometimes, and at least obligatory. So there were these schools with something like we call them boarding schools, with a lot of young Poles, of course male. These were boys' boarding schools, who were actually requiring theater production from these boys. And so, first, of course, most importantly, Society of Jesuits. This was a movement founded, just like to bring you the context, founded in 1534 by Ignatius of Loyola, a Spanish soldier turned priest. This whole idea, his idea was to convert Muslims, but he didn't succeed because there was no possibility to do this, and he was too weak because he had only 6 students. And so there was too small amount of people to really attack Muslims and to try to convert them. So they get back to Rome, and Pope Paul III made this Jesuit order officially the Catholic order in 1540. Jesuits work in education, research, culture pursuit, and their missionaries played a leading role in the counter-Reformation movements and won back many European faithful who had been lost to Protestantism. The missionaries led the counter-Reformation movement, and European faithful, I don't know why I'm just repeating this, sorry. In the 17th century, they set up ministries around the globe. They were everywhere, and this is also very interesting. They also visited England, and there is this amazing evidence of Jesuit activity in the Shakespeare King Lear. There is this very strong trace that the Jesuits would at the time use performances, of course mock performances, false performances, to persuade English people during the Elizabethan times that the Catholic religion, Catholic belief is still powerful. They would present performances with a sick person which would be exalted and cured by the Catholic priest. And these were the theaters created at random at the villages, at some places, of course never officially, because official government of the Queen Elizabeth would persecute these performers. But this whole thing is just like proof that the Jesuits were everywhere, and they would try to bring this Catholic to power whenever they lost their power. Of course, they never succeeded in England, but still in King Lear there is this person, Edgar, who is pretending to be crazy, and he is actually using the text that later were published as the evidence against Jesuits. Some spies would follow these Jesuit theater performances for the mass people, and they would write down all the dialogues to prove that this is false, that this is just like theater, not the real curing of the sick people. And so the King Lear by Shakespeare actually is quoting these special sentences, even literally, from these documents. So it's very interesting connection. So Jesuits were everywhere, and they were, of course, dissolved by Pope Clement XIV. In Poland, Jesuits were for 1564. Another more elitist group were piarists. Piarists, it's from the Latin piarum, pious. And so this was order of poor clerics regular, of the Mother of God of the pious. Schools were founded in 1621 by Pope Gregory XV. It is the oldest religious order dedicated to education. The main occupation of the piarist father was teaching children and youth with the primary goal of providing free education for poor children. In Poland from 1642. And Theatines, this was the most small, the most elitist order. The Congregation of Clerics, a regular Catholic order for men, founded by Archbishop Gian Piero Carafa, Bishop of Chieti. This is the origin of the name. Chieti in Latin, Theate, and that's why they are called Theatines. On 14 September 1524. It was exclusive, aristocratic, and formidably austere in Poland from 1664. Jesuits, the first known theater performance by Jesuit school students were in 1566. And this was, of course, during the Corpus Christi in the city called Putus. Corpus Christi is this very special religious ceremony introduced to celebrate the body of the Christ. During this Corpus Christi, the body of the Christ is taken publicly outside of the church and exposed to watch by everybody. And so for this, they also introduced many theatrical performances to celebrate the body of the Christ. And there is even the handbook. It's called Ratio Studiorum, Plan of Studies. It was published in 1598 in Latin. It made it mandatory for Jesuit schools to exercise the students in rhetoric through Latin drama. In order to speak well in Latin drama, you would play character in a play. Of course, these plays were specially written for this occasion. And as you can see, we today can identify 59 theaters in Poland, in many different parts of Poland. This was very active Jesuit school education by theater, and we can at least recall today 4,000 performances with evidences. Even more interestingly, the Jesuit school theater of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth developed intensively despite the rules announced by the order's authority. So it was obligatory to use theater for education, but there is also kind of restriction. And here is quotation translated into English from this Latin handbook. The content of tragedy and comedy, which should be performed in Latin and as rarely as possible, should be pious. It would be best if you didn't throw anything in the action that isn't appropriate and does not apply to Latin. Neither women's roles nor costumes should be introduced. And of course, this suggestion were never followed. We have many examples that the female roles were, of course, composed. Today, we know around 670 titles of theater plays, and several thousand performances took place at the college. The plays were performed at the end of the school year, during Shrovetide, at Episcopal consecration, and to celebrate Holy Week, of course, most popular opportunity. This is one example. This is on the right is the program of one of such a performance. This is called in Latin Cineres ad justam vindictam animati, what can be translated in English, ashes, animated to just revenge. This manuscript preserved at the University Library in Vilnius. In the prologue, tyranny and ambition predict the destruction of the family of the legendary king Prince Popiel II, Prince of Poland. Cruel Popiel chooses tyranny and kills his relatives. In the end, Popiel's sons die, attacked by mice alone. Tyrannical Popiel ultimately dies also, overcome with madness and pain. This is related to these early chronicles who would introduce legendary Prince of Poland, Popiel, and this whole story that his family was devoured by mice in kind of response for their tyrannical misbehavior. And so here you can see in Latin first Actus Primus and all the texts that were supposed to be recited by these school students. Important character who appears as one of the main reformers, not only of Polish educative system, but also of Polish political system. He was also very involved in reforming the society as it was at the time. His idea was to modernize Polish society. Stanisław Konarski. He was a pianist, priest, playwright, poet, translator, educator, publicist, home teacher. And his mission was to transform these parliamentary institutions. I was saying is to first and of all erase this liberal veto institution, to really create new parliamentary voting system that would be just and really equal, and of course to reform educational system. In 1740 he founded Collegium Nobilium, an elite boarding school for sons of magnates and wealthy nobles. We call these people in Polish szlachta. It's not exactly translated nobles. He replaced Latin dramas with French classicist play. He is introducing Corneille, Racine, Voltaire, of course, in originals. Most of these were first staged in original. Later, he was also the one who started to transform this education into the native Polish language. His most important book, or magnitude of opus magnum of his life, was this. It's political. It's of course nothing to do with theater. I'm only mentioning this because his ideas, his political ideas, were very much related to his also theatrical reform. On effective counsel, 4 volumes, 14 years in writing. What he is proposing. He presented the errors of the system, of the political system of course, and gave out an outline of state reform. In his ethical writings, he argued that a decent man does not go against honor, does not cheat, keeps his word, and respects the law. The only guarantee of this behavior is religion, which encourages good, discourages evil, and transforms the sinful nature of man polluted by original sin. Another critical determinant of human behavior is the principle of justice, which stresses the importance of duty towards ancestors, rulers, friends, and servants. One should strive to make as many friends as possible, because social contacts founded on virtue, not comfort, educate at least to a certain degree. All people are equal. He was repeating this, so as you can see, very fascinating ideas, and all this was always represented by few of these geniuses that were blocked by these masses. Another of his ideas, emphasis especially in education system, which again brings theater as a very useful tool. And he is emphasizing practical knowledge, teaching natural sciences, teaching national language, relegating Latin and rhetoric to secondary subject, rejection of empty erudition, introduction of manual and physical activities, promoting Christian attitude, supporting the spiritual development of the students. So, as you can see, extremely modern ideas of education, and he also produced plays. One of the most important and most successful was Tragedy of Epaminondas. Epaminondas was a real historical character, and this was the ruler of Thebes. And to fight the Spartans, Epaminondas extends the duration of his ruling illegally. He should remove himself from the Spartan office of the ruler, but he thinks that it would be good for the Sparta if he will be longer ruler, because there is a danger and he is fighting the danger, fighting the enemy. He is successful, but what he makes is illegal. And so Konarski is using this to criticize this liberum veto and the Schlachta. One person shouldn't do anything illegally. One person is too little to stop the working of the state, for example, as it was possible with this liberum veto. And so the most successful playwright appears in this school boarding theater system. His name was Franciszek Bohomolec. This is very, very active character who is not only writing extremely popular comedies, he is a very good poet, and he is very much fascinated with creating of this new Polish language education system, and he writes books on correct Polish language. He is trying to introduce Polish language as really most important communicative tool for these young students in the boarding schools. He is Jesuit, he is a teacher, he is linguist, he translates, he writes theoretical treatises, he is explaining, he is fascinated by this neoclassical three unities structure of drama. So he introduces all these ideas into his comedies. He is also editing classical Polish texts. Kochanowski, I was talking before last week about this first great Polish poet of international status. So this is the first time that somebody seriously is editing and publishing Kochanowski verses. He is also writing poetry himself, translates, and he is, we would call today, a publicist. He is writing political, in political journals, something like the commentary on the recent situation. And this is the most successful example of his play that was given to these boys in this boarding school system created by Jesuits. Polish Parisian. And as you will see, it has nothing to do with this older suggestion, no female characters. Of course, female characters, but the problem is that all these characters had to be performed by the male students. And so we have no, unfortunately, we have no evidences how this was received, how this was done in practice. I will bring you this one play in details because this, just to give you, this is of course again imitation of the French comedy, but still there are some aspects of very much local Polish culture. Times of Renaissance. After a 5-year stay in Paris, Master Robert and his servant Marcin returned to family estate in Poland. Mr. Bogacki, so the rich one, his future father-in-law, sent Robert to Paris to study. Spoiled by this stay in Paris, Robert completely changed his personality and began to follow the principle of le grand monde, the big world. This set of strange and unusual rules includes, among others, supper no earlier than 1 p.m. Going to bed no earlier than 3 p.m. Using French nomenclature, postures. It is dignified and elaborate body poses. Not talking to clergy. On absolute ban on praying from prayer books. Not attending church except on Sundays. And other unusual activities such as yawning. Proud and spendthrift, Robert cultivates this principle after returning to his hometown, which causes surprise and, with time, anger. Marcin, his servant, is similarly steeped in principle. The Robert servant, who, torn from the peasant family, accompanied the master to Paris and now calls himself Monsieur de Martinière. He is outraged at the simple orders given to him by Wilhelm or Old Starsky, these old noble citizens. Robert returned to Poland because he was promised marriage to Mr. Bogacki's daughter and her considerable dowry. Ultimately, however, Mr. Bogacki is shocked by Robert's attitude and gives his daughter to Starski's younger son, Wilhelm, who shows dignified and God-fearing Polish manners. Robert's arrogance is punished, and Marcin must return, his servant must return to the family farm. So this is open attack on this French enthusiastic fashion. You should not imitate foreigners. You should be Polish. You should imitate Polish traditional behavior. And so this is part of this ideological, also educative program. All these plays, just like this, they are used the plot in order to bring the lesson, to teach the children, here to teach them their Polishness. At the same time, there is extremely active something that we would call private theater movement. Many aristocratic families at the time, very rich, extremely cultivating extremely large area of earth, just like this, for example, in Nieśwież, beautiful castle, a lot of meadows, forests, so you can use all this natural habitat to perform. So you actually have something like natural set design. And one of these aristocratic people, very famous lady, her name was Franciszka Radziwiłł. Radziwiłł was the most, at the time, probably the richest, the wealthiest family in Poland. And so she writes comedies in Polish language, but of course she is actually imitating, especially Molière, but sometimes some other French popular playwrights. First female playwright in Poland and Belarus. This castle today is, of course, or palazzo is today in Belarus. First Polish translator of Molière. Performances at her court theater in Nieśwież. Two titles, With Love, A Scoundrel and Trapped. This lady was writing plays for this theater, which model preserved to the day, and so you can see very complex, of course imitating French National Theatre building with all these coulisses. And so, but most importantly, her performances which took place around this whole palazzo in the environment. So just like here, it's called in Polish miłość dowcipna, love with a sense of humor, for example, in translation. And so you see, she is actually using all her servants. She is introducing all the villagers from around to perform some classical sculptures. In her garden, she would, for example, ask the villagers to stand in the position of the famous monument, again from a very important place in France, and there would be costume in this classical way, and they would stand for hours just to be part of this set design in natural environment. And so, of course, the action of this place is totally unimportant. The whole point was to create a spectacle. She's celebrating the anniversary of birth of her husband or some other local important situations. And with all these performances, the most important is spectacle, sometimes walking around in the meadow. There is a lot of drink, a lot of food. These sculptures which are frozen for the most time, suddenly are getting alive and are bringing food to the passerbys. And so there is a lot of this kind of social activities which has nothing to do with the plot or with kind of a regular presentation of the theater. Here another example. This could be translated work of divine providence. And the whole action actually took place in the forest, in the meadows. There are dogs, there are animals that are part of the performance. So these were just like the spectacular opportunities to show off. These wealthy families would present their richness, their wealth. Look, we can afford this kind of spectacle. And so, of course, these are just like the covers of the published booklets with this place, because she was so rich that she would not only present the spectacle, she would also print and publish her poetry. Very poor poetry, it has nothing to do with the good art, but still is, from the performative perspective, extremely interesting, because she's introducing all this new invention from the French theatrical practice. Just like you can see here, complex inner set for this amazing half-religious story. So this is also part, but of course, of Polish theatrical culture. It has not much to do with the birth of national theatre, but because of the popularity of this court, of this wealthy theatre, there are many people in love with theatre. There would be many ladies who would love to be actors. And these ladies actually will be the first actors on the public national theatre stage. Because of this popularity, because of these overwhelming theatre activities in schools, in rich palazzos, this theatre as kind of self-presentation become something that will be dreamed of by many people. And that's why when the National Theatre would be established, it would be very easy to ask some rich, wealthy female to be actress in this theatre. Next chapter, we are approaching the public theatre. The crucial character in the attempt to modernize Polish nation during the Enlightenment is the last Polish king. The most tragical character, because his power actually was based on his connection to the Russian Empress Catherine II, Catherine the Great. She was actually bringing him to the throne. She was supporting him. And what is very paradoxical, a Russian empress actually was supporting all the reforms. He was introducing many, we would say today, avant-garde ideas. For example, very huge program of the religious tolerance. As I said, we have in Poland many different religious minorities. And he would introduce again, by support of Russian emperors, the Legal Tolerance Act. And next, he would introduce clearly reform of education. He would also establish first national public theater. Catherine the Great, this is the Russian Tsarist, and you can see here two examples of Polish theater, modern theater, which is of course dealing with Catherine. Catherine for Polish people is still this disastrous fate, the most dangerous empress ever, who would annihilate Polish nation, and actually she would force the partition. She would create no land of Polish country. And so this is a recent presentation of Kocur as this sexual animal, because in Poland we of course have many gossips that she was hyperactive sexually, and here you can see we try to show her as a kind of perversive character. For just like the foundations of this reform by the king, the radical transformation program of the state. First, he actually founded and created School of Chivalry, or we would call Cadets Corps. This will be very important because these cadets, there would be also learning by theater playing. Commission of National Education. This is really groundbreaking. This is actually the world's first Ministry of Education in 1773. Monitor. This is the newspaper, extremely popular at the time. Of course, this journal is imitation of the Spectator, the British, very important in the Great United Kingdom. But this would be the first Polish newspaper with kind of social transformative mission. Part of this mission would be to create new democratic Pole, new citizen of this enlightenment, of this enlightened world, of this era of reason. They would try to educate these Polish people into this modern new citizen of regular world society. And even more importantly, they would use this monitor to explain what exactly is theater about. The treatises on acting, the treatises on neoclassical ideas, or about new ideas after neoclassicism collapses. All this would be written in monitor to kind of promote theater. So you would have not only political issues here, but also culture, also entertainment, and also kind of very total educative program for Polish people. And of course, public theater in 1765. So this is the image of this School of Chivalry in Warsaw. It was, of course, not long in work, but still this 20 years was enough. Commandant, first leader and first really founding father of this school was Prince Adam Czartoryski. Again, this is from very, very famous and rich family who was always very involved in political situation in Poland. They would try to kind of intervene. The first, and what he creates, the first non-religious and free public school to educate new citizens in the Polish language by promoting individual thinking. From 1770, the stage plays. He himself wrote 7, starting with the most popular of his plays, A Miś tu Biłet, Panna na Wydanie. And of course, this is not, again, original production. This is based, sometimes literary, on the British very famous actor and playwright Derrick, A Miss in Her Teens. And the titles of his comedies are just like Coffee, Twins, Gambler, something like this. And they are again imitation of some British plays, not really interesting today. This A Miss to Be Wed is the only interesting place. What is this? This is also kind of programmatic play. In the preface to the publication, based on Jean-Baptiste Dubas' Réflexion critique sur la poésie et la peinture, Czartoryski presented detailed lecture on the theory and history of theater. He also promoted neoclassical rules of 3 unites. These are the unity of action, place, and time. Next, Czartoryski explains the principle of composition. What is correct exposition, correct intrigue, and how you should solve the intrigue. The historical argument is followed by a practical part in which the author teaches how to write comedies and tragedies. He also writes about acting. An actor or an actress must transform herself into the person she represents, get so close to the truth, adopt the tone and gesture so that the audience deceived by the actor forgets the actor altogether and thinks only of the character in the play. Of course, this is nothing new. We have now scholar articles by young scholars in Poland who compare all these theoretical writings by Czartoryski to the treatises in French, especially Diderot, for example. There were many French theoreticians of theater who actually introduced these theoclassical ideas. Sometimes he was translating this literally, but nevertheless, he is making this published in Polish, and he's trying to impose these new ideas on Polish audience to explain what actually is his theater proposal about. And here is the play itself. Juliana Pięknicka, which we can translate the beauty one, the titular Miss to be wed, has several admirers, but the one she cares about, Zalotnicki, I would translate this, the wooing one, went far away to war. Out of melancholy and partly for fun, Pięknicka, the beautiful lady, allows herself to be adored by 3 others. She enjoys it until her aunt decides to marry her to one of them, the old colonel. Meanwhile, Zalotnicki, the boy, is back, having come from the war for a while to find a girl. However, his uncle lives in Warsaw, with whom Zalotnicki, we would know why, but he would prefer to avoid meeting. He sends his servant to ask about the girl. The servant meets his wife, whom he left without a word half a year earlier. The wife, in turn, another coincidence, is a maid of this Miss Pięknicka, this beauty. In the end, the old colonel, to wed Pięknicka, reveals himself as a father of this boy Złotnicki and steps aside to let his son marry the girl. So this whole plot, all action is in one place, the time is very short, and the action is also united. And so this is very clear example of this theatrical unities. But funny thing happened. The first performance took place on the stage of Cadet Corps Theatre, this school of chivalry. During this comedy, 2 mirrors, actually chandeliers, broke off and fell off the ground with such a force that they all broke and injured some distinguished spectators, including very important aristocrat Branicki in his leg. They also wounded Chamberlain Krzemenicka in her forehead. One even fell near the place where the king was sitting, and as this is the spy Johann Heine report, the interregnum was closed, so the end of the king was also closed. King could be killed. The engineers from the Cadet Corps probably did not cope with the technique, and when lowering the curtain, detached the weights from the chandeliers, and this caused the tragedy. And so very dramatical first performance. One of the most famous students in this cadet school, best known alumni, was Tadeusz Kościuszko, very important person for Polish movement to liberate Poland, unfortunately failing, and also very important character in the struggle of the American people for independence. So here are costumes of these students. This is the situation of the lesson, and so this is also very theatrical. In order to be well educated in this here school of chivalry, you were supposed to use costume, you were supposed to be behaving in a particular way. They also introduced body training. They introduced a lot of movement in the teaching schedule. So this was something really very modern in idea. They tried to combine the physical prowess with intellectual cognitive skills. And so this was the idea to educate really new citizens of the world to just like stop this backward traditional heavy emphasis of Polish young people. And so the third foundation of this reform is this monitor. Like British Spectator, it's really publishing a lot of important treatises, a lot of important interventions promoting religious tolerance, promoting science, and especially criticizing feudal manners, which of course were dominating during this time. As concerns the theater, the public theater will be open in this building, wooden building, which was standing earlier. This is called in Warsaw Operalnia, open house. It could have around 500 spectators. The audience was relatively huge. And this was the first public theater building with special seats for townspeople admitted for free. And as you can see, from 1748, you could see performances, but of course, most of the time, these performances were acted by French actors. Sometimes Commedia dell'arte actors from Italy would visit here. So most of the time, you would have foreign artists performing here. Only in this 1765, in this space, the first Polish theater would be produced. This is another image of this theater building. So today, this was destroyed. Today, there is nothing like this. The new National Theatre would be built much later. But this is the place where the National Theatre actually was born. And the first play is, of course, very anecdotic, very funny. They couldn't find the playwright to write Polish first drama for opening of the National Public Theatre. The king was trying to persuade Bohomolec, this guy I was talking before, very, very skillful Jesuit. But he was afraid that he's not good enough in writing female characters, and he was ashamed. I am not good enough to write for the national public stage. No, I can do it for the school theater. And so these negotiations failed. Another character was this Józef Bielawski. He was not a good poet, but he was the only one who, at the beginning, agreed to write Polish play for this opening. But after he realized what he decided to do, he again felt ashamed, probably, and he ran away from Warsaw, far away to some provincial village, and he was hiding against the king. So the king was sending him rich gifts. He was trying to persuade him with money. At the end, he was actually translating into Polish one of Molière's very popular plays. We can translate this in Polish, Intruders. And at the end, he was also directing, and of course, because he needed ladies to play female characters, these aristocratic families offered some very important ladies to join the company. Of course, these were married ladies, so the husbands were not so much happy. And this Bielawski was not only directing, he was also filtering. He was having an affair with one of this lady. She even get pregnant with him. So she had to divorce his husband. The husband was chasing, was trying, was of course calling for a duel, this director. He was trying to avoid this. And so all this was just like a series of scandals, because ladies were introduced and these were married ladies, and the husbands, and the love stories, love affairs were almost destroying this whole idea. This comedy, as I say, was based on Le Fauchet, divorce, which was not classical play by Molière, not this one of these comedies, but something that was involving dances, in also music. So that's why he chose this, because he tried to bring something spectacular to the audience. And so this is the poster advertising this play. The plot, the prologue and epilogue were most important. Talia comes down from Parnas, this is the muse, and she sighs, to abolish Sarmatian customs, so all traditional noble Polish customs, and laughs at the wise side of such gross addictions. Now she turns directly towards the royal box. Fate has left this honor to you, Stanisław, meaning the king, so that following the example of the great Louis XIV, you would allow me to breathe the spirit in the Polish language. The author also addresses the king in the epilogue. Today, you are opening the theater of Polish defects and mistakes. And later, when your people put on the perfect form of man, when the drunkard with the map maker and the old gourmet, idler, a flatterer, an intruder will know his vices, future generations will remember this. So again, this educative dimension was present. The plot, the intruders hold the count, who is in love with Lucinda. They interrupt him to meet his lover, and then to write her a letter. The first is the narcissist Chpiotowski, a tweet, a fribble, a thorough socialite who frequented high society and willingly talked about his social successes and his love conquest. Next comes Wiecznikowski, a petty nobleman clinging to the doorknob of the powerful, begging for a penny. The graphomanic Drwigłowski comes to the count to read his bad poems. The Saxon spy Johann Christoph Heine reported to Francis Xavery Wettin, regent of Saxony, son of August III, king of Poland and Lithuania till 1763. The comedy itself can rightly be called Polish, as everyone says, because of the extraordinary crowd that came to the theater, not only made a terrible noise, but also thoroughly searched the pockets, where they found plenty of watches, snuff boxes, and handkerchiefs. Entrepreneurs collected over 500 ducats that evening, because many were eager to see the first performance of Polish comedy. And even due to the crowds, only some could be admitted, as all floors and corners were overcrowded. And of course, the spy later writes that most of these people were in their own everyday businesses. Only a small amount of these spectators actually would watch the play. The noise was so horrific. Unfortunately, this is the report written by somebody who was not eyewitness. This spy was reporting another, his friend, impression of this premiere. So he himself was not witnessing this. But we have some other evidences that this first premiere of National Polish Theatre was a disaster. Really, nobody could follow the plot because the noise was so huge. You couldn't find no place. The crowd was, of course, moving around. And as I say, people were dealing their businesses, they're doing their politics, they were shouting, they were quarreling. There were some beatings, they were beating each other sometimes in the corner. So there was as much action in the audience as on the stage. But still, this is the first Polish National Theatre production, and that's the poster which introduces the production. This actually was ticketed. Sometimes you have to pay to see the theatre. During one of the comedy repetitions between the second and the third act, one of the actresses suddenly suffered from colic and couldn't appear on stage in any way. Many spectators, including distinguished people, greatly regretted that the show could not be completed. Suddenly, one of Hetman Branicki's court officials declared that he knew the entire comedy from cover to cover by heart and would replace the sick actress if his master would allow it. He was dressed in women's dresses, and because he was a handsome boy, he looked like a girl. He played the role with what was then called universal applause. The next day, the senators and ladies attending the spectacle went to great lengths to send gifts to his daring boy. And of course, he got a lot of matrimonial offers, and at the end, he was, of course, wedding a very rich lady, and so he made his career. And so this kind of disaster situation actually turned upside down, and for this one character became a happy event. After this first performance, and after what Franciszek Bohomolec, who was first to write a play, but rejected because of his kind of humility, and now after he saw Bohomolec, he saw that this first play was really very, very bad quality. Actually, he decided to come on stage himself, and he produced next National Theatre performance. And this actual drama is of much better quality. This is called Marriage by the Calendar. This is the time where many Polish nobles, they would buy each year a calendar who would say which day is fortunate for you to marry somebody, to dig a hole for a well, or to do whatever. And they would actually follow their usual days after this calendar suggestion. So if the calendar would say that this day you shouldn't do something, you would never do it. And so, following such a calendar, a character who is the old father in this play is actually trying to marry his daughter. This was presented 1 year after the opening of the theater, National Theatre. One performance had to be cancelled because the husband came to Warsaw of the actors, one of the actors, to take back his wife. Russian deputy Nikolai Repinin shouted, "C'est bien, fort bien," a bitter critic of Polish szlachta. This was really making fun of this traditional pose. And again, you've got this schizophrenic situation. This is very good to modernize people in Poland at the time, in very backward state. But at the same time, the main stimuli to modernize Poland came from Russia, because Russians were very clever that this is the best way to conflict pause and to just create something like a state of national emergency when one is fighting another. And so this, on the one side, is very correct, but on the other side, this is supported by our cruelest enemies. And so that's why it's so strange. So when this Russian deputy, very cruel, his behavior in Poland later would be full of bloody killing of people. So when he was happy and he was approving the play, of course, this created very strong reaction among the audience. They were shouting back against this Russian, and so all this meaning of this play was actually lost, and people would very much criticize Bohomolec for this idea But what was this idea? Old man, a nobleman who settled in the countryside and ran a farm according to traditional customs, wants to marry off his daughter Eliza. His candidate for Eliza's husband is Mr. Manotracki, the wasteful one, a Polish nobleman with no property. He is heavily in debt and hypocritically, but can convince the old guy with beautiful words. And though Eliza dislikes this guy and loves Ernest, a German officer serving in the Polish army, she submits to her father's will. Old lady, who is the sister of the old guy, convinces her brother that he has chosen a bad husband for her daughter. Still, old man stands his ground, believing only Paul can become his son-in-law. He wants to get married on the same day, even against his daughter's will, because he read in the calendar that the marriage concluded on that day will be happy and prosperous. Meanwhile, the plan of the old guy are opposed by Agata, the maid of his sister and Eliza. Agata secretly sends a letter to the merchant Ansel, to whom this guy who is the waster owes money, in which she writes that the wedding has already been concluded. Eliza's dowry will cover all debts. So Ansel comes to demand money from the dead and meets this old guy. During their conversation, the duplicity of this young boy is revealed. Old man changes his opinion, and as you can imagine, the girl is marrying to this to this German officer. But the whole play was to expose the stupidity and the conservatism of this old Polish traditional nobles. And so, and again, because of this Russian deputy enthusiastic approval, the whole audience was upset. There was a hysterical reaction against this play, and even Bohomolec became afraid of his life. They would just bring in some very strong accusation. You are kind of offending Polish people. You are mocking Polish people. Why you are bringing this German boy as a positive character? And so Bohomolec was so afraid and so scared. The situation was really very dangerous. He could be not only beaten, he could be killed, because these Polish nobles, they were really crazy, bizarrely behaving. And so he went home, totally shaking, and wrote as fast as possible another play with totally opposite idea. This is the Staruszkiewicz play, The Name of the Old Man. A bitter critic of the foreigner. Now is correct. This time, the old man is fascinated by foreigners and wants to give his second daughter to a foreigner. But in the finale, he offers his daughter to an actual Pole. This is clear a glorification of Polish traditional szlachta nobles. An old man was played by Karol Staruszkiewicz, primus Polonie, the best actor in Poland. And Bohomolec, and so this audience this time was happy, because the old man, who is fascinated by foreign culture ideas, is nothing to do with the Polish traditional behavior of the old traditional nobleman on the village. This is exotic. So this could be criticized. And now the audience very much enthusiastically approve this play. We Polish people, we should support Polish values, not foreign values. If there is one freak who loves foreigners, this is only freak. He is unique, he is einhorn, so it's nothing really important. And to end this criticism of Polish people, Bohomolec decided not to write anymore about the politics, about the customs, which could be offensive for some traditionals, but he was trying to expose something which is really a more social problem, the drinking problem. And one of his last plays is The Drunkards. It's funny thing, when the first time it was presented, and this is the last play in the theater which was guided and financed by the King of Poland, Stanisław. The first opening was really very successful, but when he repeated the play 9 years later, this whole audience was totally rejecting the play. The times changed. There was the end of neoclassical theater, the new ideas were coming, and people wouldn't accept this criticism. The first time audience would really enjoy The Drunkards. The show next time was booed. And few details on these drunkards. The action takes place in Kuflowice, very meaningful name of the village. Nothing like this exists. On the Pijakiewicz, so the one who is drunkard, state. Two bachelors are competing for the hand of this Pijakiewicz daughter-in-law, Teresa. Sobrecki, surname from the French sober, and Ivroński, surname from the French Ivroń, drunkard. The Ivroń. The rest is easy to guess. Ivroński drinks heavily with Pijakiewicz and company, which is why Pijakiewicz obviously values him more than the teetotal Sobrecki, and she wants to marry her relative to him. Fortunately, there is also Teresa's uncle, who not only doesn't drink, but also, true to his name, can stay conscious. The plot is trivial again. Pijakiewicz promises Teresa to Ivroński, but while drunk, she gets into a fight with him. Instigated by Rostowski as an act of revenge, he allows the girl to marry Sobrecki immediately. Of course, he doesn't remember anything in the morning, but it's all over. In the first act, everyone is nursing a hangover in the morning. In the second, they drink in excess. Women also drink, although they hide it from men. Their increasingly heavy drinking ends in an argument over which of their fathers was the heaviest drinker, and eventually a fight. In the next act, everyone is nursing a hangover again. So it's just like the vicious circle. They are drinking to death, and they are doing some strange things, they are making some bizarre decisions, they are waking next morning, they remember nothing, and they start to drink again. And they drink everybody. But as I said, women are doing this in kind of secrecy, in different rooms. Men are doing it openly. They present themselves as heroes of drinking, and this is something that you can still find among even contemporary drunkards. When they're drinking, they talk about the last drinking, and they just quarrel who was the best drunkard. And so this is just like the vicious circle. Nothing really comes out. There is just like this plot which is self-repeating forever, and which, as you can imagine, was at the time the national problem. So that's why this was so approved first time as the good social criticism of this behavior. And at the end, two examples of modern stagings. This was at the time very famous. Helmut Kaiser, here in Wrocław, created a historical adaptation. He was doing this just in the costume of the late 18th century. Distance from our, at the time, communistic reality. Last time, in Krakow, one of the most important young directors, the lady created very contemporary staging with the drunkards who are just like our contemporaries, and this became extremely successful production. And so these problems of drinking among Slavic people, this is still really problem, and still we have this today. Of course, this is not only Polish problem, not only Russian or Ukrainian problem, but still we have to deal with it. And so she attacks very, very radically this Polish behavior. You can still see it on the streets. So, yeah, before I go to the next subject, I will probably stop. I propose that we meet for the next subject next week, because this is the huge subject. I should bring a lot of context. So thank you for today, and let's stop on this. I'm sorry that I'm reading so much, but I'm trying to get as fast as possible through all these details, because this is not really anything so fascinating like the Shakespearean theater. This all is imitation, this all is kind of secondary in terms of artistic value. But still, it's national. So thank you.
Thank you. Wait.